Welcome to another astrology podcast. In this podcast, I'd like to talk about Sagittarius Rising, but I'm going to do so from my usual psychological point of view. So, I am going to envisage Sagittarius as a developmental process rather than an end in itself, because Sagittarius is the ninth sign of the zodiac, and that's coming from Aries, Taurus, Gemini, all the way to Sagittarius. So I'm going to speak of Sagittarius as a developmental process, not as an end in itself. And this is my approach towards anything astrological, because the human psyche is a work in progress. Okay, the ancients referred to Sagittarius as uh, Chiron, son of the Titan Kronos. And he was one of the many centaurs in Greek mythology. Now, I don't know if Chiron and Sagittarius have that relationship, but the mythology was that the main reason that Chiron was born half man and half horse, whereas other centaurs were born of the sun and the rain clouds, is that one day Chiron was accidentally shot with a poisoned arrow by Hercules. Now, even though Chiron was a great physician, he could not heal himself and he could not die because he was immortal. So, he was in such great pain that he wanted to die. And so, in order to die, he offered to give up his immortality to Prometheus. And Prometheus was you know, the, the god, literally the demigod who gave fire to humankind. And so the god, the Zeus, cursed him, chained him and imprisoned him. So Chiron gave up his immortality to release Prometheus from his chains, and Prometheus was now free. But and Chiron now, when Zeus saw what Chiron had done, he had so much pity on him and the kindness that he had shown to Prometheus that he immortalized him in the stars. Now, the rundown for this mythology is coming from a website called globeatnight.org slash mythology slash Sagittarius. Now, if you want to go read up on that, I like to investigate the myths behind the constellations or the planetary energies, because even though myths are fables, they're fictitious stories, but they are designed to capture particular aspects of human consciousness. That's really what they are. In all the myths, it's like Alice in Wonderland or Alice through the Rabbit Hole. It's a myth. But within the myth, the author or the narrator is trying to teach something. And whatever the author is trying to teach is always related to particular aspects of human consciousness and how they behave, how they are linked from a chemical point of view in terms of cause and effect. That's really what the stories are for. The essential nature of the structure of the causal structure within the narrative encodes the key to predicting the behavior of that particular archetype or personality archetype. Because the only reason this works is because human consciousness is not just, it has rules. It obeys certain logic. So your reality is not just a manifestation of whatever you want. The karma that is embedded within reality it is coming from the structure of personality. Okay, so if you want to get a rundown of the mythology surrounding the personality archetype of Sagittarius, there are so many references online. I can give you that. If you also want a rundown for the astronomical details or data behind the constellation Sagittarius, because Sagittarius is one of the constellations, one of the 88 modern constellations as listed by Ptolemy. Okay, and it's interesting because your modern Bible has 88. Okay, I'm not gonna go there. So anyway, the essential thing about this constellation called Sagittarius is that in order to understand it properly, we're going to have to examine a few things that are not quite related to Sagittarius itself. because we need to understand Sagittarius as a developmental process, as I said earlier, as a psychological developmental process. Because Sagittarius is the ninth sign on the zodiac. So it needs to evolve through 8 signs. So what starts off as the Aries point begins to evolve until it gets to Sagittarius. Now, the Aries point is literally the birth of awareness, the birth of experiential awareness. But no, it is not the birth of experiential, it is the birth of awareness. Because at that point, at the Aries point, awareness has no form, it has no self. It just is. And that is the essential nature of the I am. You see, it needs no form, it doesn't know what it is, and it doesn't care to know. The essential thing about it is that it is, that's all. And then this evolves into Taurus, and then Taurus has a form. And the form takes the form is the material body, and the only way you know you have a material body is because you have these nerve endings connected to these sense organs that convey information about their status or the state of your being. So, you could feel pleasure or pain, and that is the essential nature of Taurus. And then that evolves into Gemini, and then Cancer, and then, you see, the essential thing about the sign of Cancer, which begins the next part of the, I'm going to talk about these in detail, because what I want to do is I want to give you a rundown of what becomes Sagittarian energy, the psychic energy of Sagittarius, what it means. And then when you understand what it means, then you understand what it does. And then we can now talk about it as a rising sign. So basically, the first 20 minutes of this conversation would apply to all manners of Sagittarian energy. If your sun is in Sagittarius, if your moon is in Sagittarius, if you got personal planets in Sagittarius, okay? And then eventually I'm going to conclude the conversation by applying all that, I have described to the rising sign, because the rising sign is literally, like I said, is just a point of awareness. And so what becomes of Sagittarius when it rises or when it ascends as a point of awareness, that is pretty important, because because that ascendant point sets the tone for everything else in your natal chart. And it's going to be really important to clarify what Sagittarius means as a rising sign. So here we go. In order to start the exploration proper, I'm going to have to start by looking at the sign of Libra. Because whatever Sagittarius becomes, the main process actually starts in Libra. Because there is a hard, boundary between Virgo and Libra. Most people don't realize that it's the importance of the descendant. The descendant is often not overlooked. A lot of astrologers talk about the IC, they talk about the MC, they talk about the ascendant, but the descendant rarely receives any mention at all. And yet I find it to be extremely powerful. Why? Because it is at your descendant that you meet another. Prior to your descendant, you are literally just your own universe, your own world, your own perspectives. And it is at the descendant that you come to the realization that there are other people that are their own worlds, that are their own universes. And so the challenge for the essential nature of self-consciousness is to merge with another self. Because that's like two universes merging together. And this is not an easy process. And it falls on the sign of Virgo, or the 6th house, to navigate this essential process of connection. And that is the fundamental nature of the number 6, because the Virgo is the 6th sign. And, that boundary is the crossover between, because it's not a coincidence that you have 6 signs or 6 houses below the horizon and 6 above. If you understand that, you are also a 6, then when you're looking at a natal chart, what you're looking at is actually 3 6s. That's really what it is. But that's a topic that I've expounded upon in many other podcasts. If you're really interested, the 6 that you are is in your cortex. The cortex of your brain is made up of 6 layers. You can go look it up. So the essential thing is to start the investigation at Libra, Now, this might seem strange because, what has Libra got to do with Sagittarius? I'll explain. There is a boundary, what is called the horizon, the horizontal axis, because the natal chart has two prominent axes. One is the vertical axis, which is the Imium Kali to the midheaven, and the other is the ascendant to the descendant. Now, this is the cross that the defines the circle into four equal quadrants. Now, each quadrant represents a milestone of development of some type within the psyche. Okay. Now, I'm not going to delineate the importance of these quadrants because there are a lot of good articles and books that have been written about this. But Sagittarius falls within the third quadrant, and now the boundary between the second quadrant and the third quadrant, that's where a very serious type of magic happens. Now, if you've been listening to any of my astrological podcasts, it would become apparently clear that these angles represent phase transitions in the burgeoning psychology of the human. And the best way to understand this entire process is the developmental sequence, the emotional, mental, developmental sequence of a child as soon as they're born and up until maturity. Now, at the ascendant, which is the first point of this cross, is the individual becomes aware of its existence, and that's it. That's about it. That's the only thing you get at that point. There is no form or structure. The ascendant as a self has no body. It has no form. It has no idea what it is. The only reference bit of information that it has is that it exists, and that's it. Okay? And that represents the impulse of life, which begins the sign we call Aries. Okay? Now, and this process is this sense of existence. It's so intimate. It's the most intimate type of experience a human being can ever have in terms of the awareness of self. Okay? This ascendant is how you see yourself. When you bring up an image of yourself, when you put together a construct of yourself, the I am sort of image in your head, this is the sense of self that you bring up. It's the oldest sense of self you will ever have because it's been with you since the moment you were born. It's just that, something so familiar and so common is very easily pushed into the background and then forgotten, even though it's always there. Now, this is not the experience. This sense of self is not the experience you share with another. Most people will never see this part of who you are. They may intuit its existence, but the only person who's privy to this sense of self is you, the individual. Now, the second part of this angle, which is the IC, transforms through Aries, the first house, the second, and the third. Okay? And by the time it gets to the IC, something has happened to this sense of self. It is now feeling very secure. It has figured out it has a body. It has figured out it knows how to communicate with its immediate environment. Okay? And it has figured out that those closest to it are the people that it can feel secure with. And usually that's family. But what it really is emotional security. So now the self begins to understand that it is part of a very... it feels safe in the sense that an environment has been created around which it can find, around which it understands the concept of total acceptance, because that's essentially what the enigma of emotional security is. Absolute certainty, and that forms the foundation upon which psychology grows up. Okay, the important work that is going to be done at the MC always has its foundation in the IC, because you can't build a house without a good foundation. In fact, it is a common sense of, amongst people who build skyscrapers, is the depth of the foundation or the piles that go into the ground is always proportional to the eventual height of the building that you want to raise. So this foundational concept is embedded in the IC. So by the time the sense of self is leaving the IC, it has found its feet, so to speak. It is absolutely secure in those. It has found a place for it in this world. Okay. Now, like I said, there are two very important phase transitions that matter in the life of an individual. The first, you are born into two families. You are born into a family that you didn't choose. That's your first. That's your ascendant. And then you will engage another family of your own choice, your marriage partner or your partner, so to speak, the person you decide to go through life with, because that one you can choose. Okay. And that is the most significant. That's the one that actually holds the key, because now you can exercise something called free will. Now, the whole point of being able to choose a partner is anchored on the fact that you have been able to understand and achieve emotional security, whatever that means for you. That is, the sense of self has a foundation upon which it can actually build a personality. Because the next sign or the next house that comes after that angle is the fifth, and the fifth is the presentation of the fully realized and fully developed ego, the creator. Okay, the one that says I will. That's really how it is. And by the time this foundational self gets to the other angle, it's ready to meet another. But first, it can't really go into meeting another, because prior to this, every experience that it has had has always been internalized, in a sense. The very first time it actually needs to consider the bringing in of a stranger, that's someone who's not part of its foundational circle, into its own awareness and its own reality. That happens at that third phase transition, that third angle, which we call the descendant. And as such, the descendant represents an extremely important angle. In fact, I think its importance, is often underplayed, because this is the first point at which you now consider the existence of someone or other people who have as much power as you. And so and before a mind, can go into that, can cross that transition, that third angle, which is the descendant, something very remarkable needs to happen. And this happens in the sign of Virgo or the sixth house, because what needs to happen is the ego needs to be tempered. Now, the tempering of the ego is the willingness to engage in a relationship. What you need to do to yourself to be able to accommodate another. This does not happen in the seventh house. It happens in the sixth, or it happens in Virgo. And so Virgos are the actual relationship builders. They are the ones they basically condition themselves to temper their ego. That's to reduce their ego, to reduce the volume of that ego, so that they can now go into a relationship with another. Now, it doesn't mean that the ego is not there. The ego is already formed in Leo in the fifth. But you can't take that into Libra, because that makes the negotiation process very difficult. So, but once this phase transition is crossed, then the individual begins to negotiate with another. And this negotiating process is what we refer to as Libra. Now, the negotiating process is so important because it forms the basis upon which the entire Sagittarian energy will be built, as we will see. Now, the negotiation process, that's why Libra is a social sign, and it's represented by the glyph of Libra is represented by the scales. But the essential aspect of Libra is that dynamic back and forth, because what needs to leave that sign of Libra or the seventh house is a sharing formula. And despite the fact that the glyph of Libra is a set of scales, it has no bearing on exactly what that sharing formula is going to be. Some people think that it has to be 50-50. I respectfully disagree. sharing is whatever you guys are comfortable with, whatever you are comfortable with, whatever you feel that you need to give up, okay, as part of the social dynamic that is the negotiation process of being in a relationship with someone. It could be a business relationship, that is when the relationship negotiation is formalized, or it could be an informal relationship, maybe a marriage partner, okay, and and what you bring into this is how much of yourself you're willing to give, how much you're willing to compromise. And that obviously depends on your sixth house. But the seventh house is now how you now present that in your argument. Because when you meet someone for the first time, you are engaged in social negotiation. Now, ultimately, there's very few relationships that end up being 50-50. I mean, how would you calibrate a 50-50 relationship? No, most relationships end up being 60-40, 70-30, 80-20, 90-10. You see, I consider 100-0 an absolutely abusive relationship because it means the other party isn't bringing anything into. But everyone has their levels of comfortability. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It doesn't just have to be as prescribed by some cookbook and say all relationships need to be 50-50. This is not how human beings don't measure these things with numbers. It depends on how much you're willing to take and how much you're willing to give that makes you comfortable enough to be able to function and be happy. That's really what it is. Because whatever sharing formula is structured in the seventh house or in Libra, that is what is taken into intimacy in the eighth. And intimacy is where the wheels actually grind, so to speak. Because what needs to happen is two people need to go into this enclave called Scorpio or the eighth house, but only one thing can leave that enclave. Now, usually what happens is that the ego of these two parties who have negotiated in the seventh house, that ego needs to die as on an individual basis, so that what can be reborn is a singular type of consciousness that is the fruit of that intimacy, that union. And that process is what is referred to as the transformation of the eighth. Now, it is a type of crisis because the ego absolutely formed in the fifth house in Leo. The last thing it wants to do is to give that up. It has already tempered itself in Virgo. But the general idea of giving up that ego feels like death. It really is. And that's why the eighth house represents an intrinsic point of vulnerability with another. And remember, it's not the type of vulnerability that is formed in the fourth house where you are around family and you feel safe. This is the first time you've actually had to give that vulnerability to another, as to an absolute stranger. And then the process of bringing a stranger into your universe, okay, and allowing them to co-create your universe with you. Of course, the risks are immense, and that's what the seventh house of negotiation really is all about. What is it? What are you willing to give up of yourself? Because whatever you agree to give up, it becomes transformed. And I personally, I don't think you can really go back per se, because everybody you get to that level with, that base with, leaves an imprint on you, and you leave an imprint on them. They're no longer the same person, and you're no longer the same person. Okay, doesn't matter whether you break up or not, but this is how it works. Now, what is the Sagittarian energy? It's taken me almost 15 minutes to get to this. That's if you've been able to hang on and listen so far, then congrats to you, because now I'm about to give you what the talk is all about. The Sagittarian energy is the energy of release. That's really what it is. And that is why the glyph of the Sagittarian is a Centaur that is an archer, that has an arrow that it needs to pull all the way back. And the whole point of pulling that arrow all the way back is because it needs to release this arrow. Right? Now, the design of the arrow is that it's supposed to fly beyond what the eye can see into the far horizon. That's the whole point. But the Centaur is not a human. It's a half man or woman and half animal or half horse. So what this basically says, and some astrologers say that the Centaur is actually Chiron. I don't know about that. But what I do know is that the Centaur is not fully human. So the desire of the part that's pulling the archer, the part that's pulling the arrow is human. But the mobility of the archer is not human. And what that says is that um, the processes which develop into the archer are coming from the primitive side of ourselves. That is, what becomes the Sagittarian energy of release comes from the sexual intimacy of the eight. It is the union. It is the result of that union that is the Sagittarian energy. Because it describes the result of what true intimacy does to the human psyche. Because when two egos dissolve into each other and merge and transform, and if this is done in a positive, uplifting way, the output from that process is a very specific type of awareness. And it is that specific type of awareness that is being described by Sagittarius. It is the energy of release. And what does the release do? The release allows you to envision a horizon that is beyond your immediate perception in the sense of achievement. You now have a belief within you, a faith, not a belief, sorry. You now have a faith within you that everything is within your reach. You are the arrow. You are the archer. That's really what it is. What, the Sagittarian is that bow and arrow. And the process by which the arrow flies out into the horizon is the process by which the individual reaches into the far corners of their existence, stretching their existence, reaching for more, and being able to incorporate that more into their own awareness in a way that allows them to be able to receive this. So the fundamental idea behind the nature of that release is that you believe that you deserve whatever you can reach. There is no rejection, at least if the whole process is working correctly. And this is why the Sagittarian impulse has been associated with Jupiter. Because it is the faith in the unknown, because you don't know what's beyond the horizon. But the essence of that feeling of release is that whatever is beyond that horizon is good. It's the unknown, but you're not afraid of it because you're willing to fly towards it at pace. And the whole point, the whole essence, the entire reason for this dynamic, right, is because of the work that needs to be done in Capricorn, in the 10th. Because it is in the 10th and that Capricornian energy where this feeling is now transformed into an important work, a life work. It is how the calling which you feel, right, on the vertical axis of the IC to the MC, it is how that calling is implemented. It cannot be implemented without the Sagittarian energy. The Sagittarian energy is the inspiration, the idealization, the positivity, the luck, if you care, that allows you to envision vast horizons of existence, and more importantly, to be able to accept and incorporate all of this into your psyche without rejection. This contrasts to the Saturnian experience that when you reach out to different to more aspects of the universe, you just get told no. And you have to shrink, you have to limit, you have to contract, you have to define the boundaries rather than expand. Now, this particular idea comes from Robert Hand, his book, a very influential book, called where is it now? The Astrological Houses. Very good book. All the symbols of astrology. Where did I put it? The title of the book is Horoscope Symbols by Robert Hand. Very good one. And that's where this idea of the Jupiterian experience being an expansion of possibility, and the Saturnian experience being the contraction of possibility, within the psyche in terms of acceptance or refusal. And that's really what it is. But, what I'm doing is I'm indicating that this is necessary for the work that is done. This is necessary for the work that is done in Capricorn. Because remember, the entire point of the Sagittarian energy is to let loose. And by letting loose, it accommodates more and more of experiential awareness. And that is the positivity people talk about with the Sagittarian. The eternal optimism of always seeing a way forward or always believing. And that is the essence of what forms the idea of faith in a Sagittarian, or the idea of faith in the ninth house. Because sometimes when you look at the descriptions of Sagittarius or the ninth house, you hear people talk about faith, luck, and expansiveness and all that. Idealism, optimism. Yeah, but what does it mean? If you don't really understand why there is faith, why there is optimism, then of what use is this information to you? Because the whole thing, and your life is not a random set of occurrences that just throw out buzzwords. Your life is a series of events that connect with each other. And it is from the connection that you derive meaning. Okay? So the essence of Sagittarius is to be able to convert the intense emotional energy that is generated in Scorpio into the worldly achievement that is Capricorn. That's really what it is. That behind that worldly achievement is the dynamic of emotional intensity that is actuated when positive meets negative and they merge, or that is actuated when a couple, through the power of the truthness behind their intimacy, the force and the power behind their sexual union, and how this elevates both of them in true love. That power is the energy of success. That power is the power that allows you to build Capricornian success. And it really doesn't matter if even if you don't have a partner, the energy of Scorpio is looking for release. That's really what it is. Some cultures call that the serpent power, the Kundalini, and all that. But the general idea is the sexual function within a human being is so primitive and it's so deep that what it's really looking for is elevation. It wants to be elevated because it is that energy that translates into worldly success. It's not an issue of morality. It's an issue of, you have a river, okay, and the river is a wild Russian river, ferocious in its form. Now, chances are if you jump into this wild Russian river, chances are that's the end. You lose your life. But the river is not, it's wild, it's Russian, and it's very powerful, but that's not just all it is. If you leave this river and you open up a channel and it rushes into a plain, it will flood the entire plain and destroy everything in there. It will destroy everything in its wake. Okay? Now that's one potential that it has. But there is another potential. You can create a dam. Skillfully, you can channel the energy of that water and you can create a dam and then put into that dam electric turbines or mechanical turbines or whatever that convert mechanical energy into electricity. And what you have is electrical power. And that power you can use to light up an entire city rather than destroying it. Now, in this analogy, the sexual union is the mad, rushing, raging river that is within everyone. Okay? Now you can just open up the channels and let it flood everywhere. It has the power, the potential energy to destroy a very vast area of land. Okay? Render it uninhabitable. Or you can channel that river so skillfully that you build a dam that can power an entire city. Okay? So it is the idea behind that. Now, both the destructive element and the city that can potentially be built, both are represented by Capricorn. Okay? The idealism, the idea, the sense of self, the awareness to actually construct a dam, that is the energy of Sagittarius. Because it's not just, it's a very swift type of energy. That's why it's an idealist. It's the last fire sign. So it's a very evolved fire sign. But it needs to find translation. Now, that's basically it for Sagittarius. So
I'm now going to go into the fact that it is a rising sign, because what I've just described, or what I've been describing, is the energy of Sagittarius. That's just plain Sagittarius energy. What does it mean now when Sagittarius is actually rising based on everything that we have come to know? It means that this energy of release, this capacity to turn intense emotional energy into worldly success, now sits as the first point of self-awareness. So it essentially has no form. So it must then convert the experiences of the 12th house, which would typically have Scorpio on it, into the worldly material success of Capricorn, which now sits on the second house. I hope you understand what I mean. Because that's really what it is. As an ascendant, this is the framework that will now drive everything else in the chart. Now, if you have as a Sagittarius rising, if you have planets in the 12th house and you have planets in the second house, even in the first house, then these planets form the essence of your life story. They're basically telling you how you are going to convert, right? Because when Scorpio is at the cusp of your 12th, right? Now, the intense emotional energy is now drawn from everybody. Because the 12th house, if you give it a specific type of interpretation, it is the mass unconsciousness of everybody. So that is the house of mass media. It is in that house that everybody is connected and everyone is the same. And so everyone is faceless, and yet there is a multitude. Okay? So it is the house that reaches out to everybody. But it's also the house of legacy. Because at this point of evolutionary development within a psyche, that's the end of life. The 12th house is basically how the kind of legacy the person wants to leave behind. If you imagine, because worldly success in the 10th or in Capricorn, what is it for? The whole point of that worldly success is to be able to state, declare, to stand up in the universe and say, I was here. I did it. It is me. And then everybody applauds you. But the most applause you're looking for comes from a very specific group of people. And those group of people are the people who recognize the real achievement. Think about it. Somebody gets awarded in terms of honors and praise and all that for work which they did, maybe their life's work or whatever. Now, the news filters up to everybody. Everybody says, wow, this guy's a great guy. Look at what he did. Look at how long it took him. Look at the perseverance, the endurance, the skill, the mastery. All those Capricornian qualities that really make a Capricorn stand out. Look at the patience. Look at all of this. Okay? And that's the general story to everybody. But there is a core group of people who truly understand the achievement itself. Those people, they are represented by the peer group of the person being awarded. They are his contemporaries. That is the nature of that 11th house Aquarius. The group that understands. And so the applause of that group is more worthwhile to the individual who's been awarded than the generality of people that were applauding in the tent. And then, after that, what the individual now thinks about is the legacy, the kind of legacy they're going to leave in the world when they're not there. And that is what that Scorpio now talks about when you have Sagittarius rising. That's what the Scorpio in the 12th house is talking about. It's talking about the nature of that legacy. And what it means to the people that are going to be, the faceless people, how they're going to remember you. Now, the Sagittarius rising knows that in terms of tangible achievement, it would have to be based on money. Have you ever spoken to a Sagittarian? Yes, they don't, a Sagittarius rising is very different from the typical, your basic, because the rising sign now takes over, is that Capricorn falls on the cusp of the second house. So this worldly achievement that they're talking about, it's money or something that has to do with material value. Because eventually they start, even though they have this optimism and idealism, they start out in an incredibly poor state of self-worth, material self-worth. You see? And so the challenge is to to persevere in the face of this degradation of self-worth initially, so as to be able to attain the success. So when you look at the chart of a Sagittarius rising, what you're looking at is the story of this triplicity: Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, how it plays out. You see? And the individual, the native, is dominated by this because they know that they seek, they know they can feel the urge and the need, the instinct, because now it's on the first house, the instinct to expand. It's incredible because then you need to look at the position of Jupiter to get a full idea of what, depending on what quadrant Jupiter is in, and depending on the condition of the ninth house, that will now form the story, the background of the story, because these things always occur in triplicates. That will now form the background of the story of how this task of converting intense emotional energy into worldly success, which is financial. That's really what it is. And so where your typical Sagittarius, depending on where the sign lands depending on what ascendant the person has, your typical sun sign Sagittarius is very different from your Sagittarius rising, because your typical sun sign Sagittarius is so full of zest and life and optimism. It's easy for them to let go of what they have because they believe that when you give out, the universe rewards you with similar things. So they're not stingy per se. They're not, they might give out things that come easy to them. Your Sagittarius rising is not like that. They've got Capricorn on the second house. So they are all about the creation and maintenance of self-worth. Okay? Now the danger to a Sagittarian, is too much optimism. Luck. Because the thing about luck is that it runs out from time to time, So, it's all about that faith and that. Because remember, their entire faith, luck, or whatever you want to call it, it's powered by emotional intensity in the 12th. And the 12th house, there's nothing solid there. It's basically here 1 minute and gone the next. It's so ethereal. It's almost effervescent, It's the house where you can't really find anything tangible. What it does is it tries to make everything intangible. So depending on the position of Pisces, Neptune, and all that, that will play into the behavior of that Scorpio, depending also on the position of Pluto, because at the end of the day, you need to look at everything as a whole. But that emotional intensity, because it's on the cusp of the 12th, it doesn't really have that oomph. So you can't really pull it together the way you would if it sat naturally on the 8th house or on Earth house or an emotional house. You see, it's not. Pisces is an emotional house, but the energy of Pisces is just too scattered. It's what it wants to do is sublimate that energy. So, what Sagittarius rising eventually begins to understand is that this energy that is sitting on the cusp of the 12th house cannot be wielded by the ego. This is an important lesson for them. It probably happens around between the ages of 30 and 45 years old. They begin to understand that because prior to that, they always feel the energy, they feel this intense emotionality on how to, the willingness to just expand and just blow up. But when they try, it doesn't quite work out now financially. Until they now begin to understand that this is not an energy I can manipulate. It's not an energy I can control. If I really have to win this battle, I'm going to have to let go. That intense emotional side of, obsessive, controlling aspect of me, that energy is too much for any one person. It needs to be sublimated to the masses. So a good outlet is to engage in some type of selfless service where there is no real relationship between the service being rendered, right, and the people receiving, between the person rendering the service, rather, and the people who receive the benefits of the service. Some type of charity, maybe volunteer work, maybe, just a way to sublimate the intensity of that passion. And that now gives the Sagittarian energy the release that it is, the Sagittarian ascending energy, the release that it wants to implement it to success in Capricorn. This is a secret. Okay? So that's about it.